So when you listen to video game music, you feel like you're listening to the memories of a life you once lived. So I asked you guys last week to ask me anything about video game music, and I would answer in a Q&A video inspired by the great Adam Neely. I recommend you to check out his channel if you like music in general, but here we're gonna talk about why is video game music so freaking cool. I'm interested on how some composers can get a recognizable style while not getting repetitive from game to game. Here's my answer. I think that having a style as a composer is quite unavoidable. It's sort of like a hint left by a serial killer, sometimes willingly or unwillingly, that he was the one to commit the deed. The hint could be a recurring sound, like in the case of Shuji Megura's clean guitars throughout the Persona series. It can be a choice of instruments coupled with a specific style of melodic writing, like in the case of Nobuo Uematsu. Check out this soundtrack on Final Fantasy IX. And how it compares to this other one from Fantasian, his latest soundtrack. Or it could be even just the way in which the composer writes certain harmonies, like Masashi Hamauzu's style could be recognized anywhere, for example. This can change over time, by the way. It depends on a person's growth and a person's taste, and also sometimes maybe you might want to do something that sounds very much unlike you as a composer. But for the most part, when we just let ourselves freely on the page, what comes out is who we really are. How do games effectively use leitmotifs or leitmotifs? I don't know how to say this word. Anyway, without making a lot of the songs sound similar? Well, the cool thing about music is that just using the same melody doesn't mean that people are gonna be bored about it, because when you change the context around the melody itself, it's almost as if it changes phase. For example, check out this Star Wars cover that I made once, where I challenged myself to keep on repeating the Star Wars main theme ad infinitum without having it get boring. Have this iteration. And this other iteration. Same melody, but it sounds quite different, right? If you change the genre, it becomes even more dramatic. Obviously, when you're a good composer, you can do this very easily. So composers that use a lot of leitmotifs know how to recontextualize them in a way that they sound completely new. That is a lot of tracks, and when you listen to them now, you're like, oh yeah, I can hear it. But if you play the game, you're barely gonna realize what is going on. This is the equivalent of maybe seeing a person dressed in a certain way all the time, and then one day they show up in a completely different dressing style. The person stays the same, but you see them from a completely different perspective, which is incredibly new and fresh, intriguing. So that's how leitmotifs get away with like being played so many freaking times and not getting boring. What do you think specifically separates music in video games from any other genre? Okay, at the end of the day, video game music is still music, and I don't even know if it's right to call it a genre, because inside video game music there's so many genres of music, but there's a few things that make that type of music special. One reason is nostalgia. As my friend Family Jules once said to me, when you are watching a movie, there's a sense that you're watching someone else's story, but games instead are the most interactive piece of media we have, and they make us feel like part of the story. So when you play a game, the soundtrack feels like it's a soundtrack to you. So when you listen to video game music, you feel like you're listening to the memories of a life you once lived through a screen, but that you still feel like you live. That's very powerful. Another thing is that video game music is made to tell the story of the game, very differently from mainstream music, who's made to tell the story of common people. The songs you hear chart-topping on the radio are about the same subject matters all the time. But video game music instead has to be about the game, and that creates a much more rich amount of stories, sound it can have, and stuff like that. So composers of game music are inspired to follow more variety and write music in so many genres, and so it's inherently more interesting to hear sometimes. Has there ever been an host of a game that made you go, this doesn't fit the gameplay or story at all? Well, look up Mansion Basement from Resident Evil 1. That is my answer. How much of the game does the composer know when they are creating a piece? Are they given the scenarios in which the song will play, or just vague information as to the tone the developer is going for? That's a very interesting question, and I want to bring in a friend who has a much broader perspective on this than I do. Cassie Edwards. How exactly was the process of composing Bury the Light from Devil May Cry 5? What did they ask you to do? What did you know?
For Bury the Light, they sent me maybe about 10 example tracks all over the place. We're talking about anything from 1992 Pantera to like 2010 EDM rock stuff that I've never heard in my entire life. And I'm sitting here taking all this in, and I'm just like, yeah, like maybe like a millisecond of this song is Virgil, but I think they really just want to make sure that these little elements that you can pull from Devil May Cry or Virgil's personality are put into this whole thing as one big picture. One of the things early on was no distortion guitar was allowed anywhere but the chorus. But you know, when you're sort of like, well, what am I going to do then? And then I was just like, well, I'm just going to come up with like the biggest bass sound that's just going to sound as gnarly as a guitar anyways.
By the way, that was an outtake out of the 1-hour podcast I did with Casey. You can find it on the Alex Moukala podcast channel, link in the description. What should video game music try to achieve more? Atmosphere and immersion, creating a less melodic form of music like Breath of the Wild, orchestral, mostly seen in boss fights, or melodic like Undertale? Well, I think video game music should try to achieve what the game demands or what the game needs. I would be absolutely taken by surprise in a bad way if I play a Super Mario game and there's no music at all, like in Bloodborne. Why would that happen? Well, because I'm used to hearing these very cheerful and happy tunes that make me like put a spring in my step while I'm jumping around. Woohoo! Like that, like Mario everywhere. But hey, if I had as much music in Bloodborne as we have in a Mario game, I would be like, this is actually making the experience worse. And I don't mean if I had happy music. Even if I had like gothic music and dark music playing all around Bloodborne, that would reduce the immersion in the game. Because, for example, one of the very strong things about that soundtrack is that when you're roaming around Yarnan and all the places where there's no bosses, there's no music playing. You just hear the coughs, the noises of cursed people and the beasts and the visceral, putrescent Yarnan noises. You hear like a pig squealing at the end of the tunnel, and you're like, holy shit, I'm in danger. And you hear all those sounds exactly because of all the silence surrounding you. And then when you find a boss, you hear Latin choir starting, and you feel that contrast between the silence and the noises that came before with this super epic, cinematic, dark, apocalyptic sound. That is what makes Bloodborne bosses look and feel so freaking dangerous. And at the same time, the silence is what makes Yarnan feel very ominous and creepy. I think that's the one thing that gamers need to understand, even when it comes to Breath of the Wild. Every game needs a different type of soundtrack, and that's why there's so many different composers, and very few make the cut on specific games. This question is kind of long, but it's essentially asking, is there a track from a game that you didn't vibe with or that wasn't your taste? One of the most difficult things for me is to have a negative opinion on something, because I tend to really find something to like in everything, for the most part, especially if we're talking about games or music. However, I can tell you one thing that might lead some people to unsubscribe or to call me out or shit like that. Actually, there's some times where I hear a song and I'm like, this isn't as great as people told me it was gonna be. I had this reaction with Shadow Lord. I actually think it's a good track, and I totally understand why people love it, but I think Nier Replicant, at least in the remastered version, has many tracks which are far more interesting than Shadow Lord. It's a good composition, but as a composer myself, I don't know, it didn't do anything new or anything that blew my mind. On the other side, Shadow Lord's Castle is a total banger. My absolute favorite soundtrack in Nier Replicant is one that I haven't named on this channel yet. Maybe one day I'll make a video about it. But yeah, Shadow Lord is overrated. Sorry. When you start a new game, do you pause to take in the music and reverse analyze it while you're playing it? Or do you just experience it like a normal person? For the most part, I just experience the game. I don't really pause it or something. Except a few times where there's some pieces of music which are so good that I literally put my controller down and I just listen. That is happening a lot to me while I'm playing Neo, The World Ends With You these days, which is a soundtrack which is incredible. Like, check out this one. Sometimes though, I might play a game and be like, let me actually take notes. So for example, I've been replaying FF7 Remake and I've been taking notes of every single leitmotifs as it comes up. I don't know if you can see them, but these are kind of my notes for all the leitmotifs in the game or something, and there's much more than you saw. Maybe one day I'm gonna make a video about that. It was not on my first playthrough, but on the second, because I was like, let me actually understand what they did. And when I did that, I just started to appreciate this game's soundtrack a lot more, even though the first time I listened to it, I was already like, this is perfect. Now I know the level of depth and dedication that the composer showed. Do you think it's weird that there are some people who only listen to video game music? I think it's beautiful that everybody has different tastes in art and music. That is something to be celebrated, not to be shunned. Also, I would definitely recommend to listeners of any type of music to go beyond their comfort zones a little bit. I believe that people who only listen to the music that identifies them are losing something very valuable. Because, hey, I love electronic music, like some very aggressive electronic music, the stuff you hear in clubs where people do drugs. And I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. I don't do drugs. I can still love the very psychedelic, crazy, dark trance music, or a person might love ridiculously aggressive metalcore music and be an extremely chill dude. So for example, if you want to expose yourself to metalcore music as someone who only listens to video game music, I definitely recommend to check out Ropanuganti. Also, the funny thing about this question is that video game music in itself has a lot of genres in it, so chances are, if you love video game music, your musical taste is very broad. So I would say, why limit yourself to just that? Why is video game music so good? Well, because when you hear a song on a video game from a composer, you're hearing the culmination and apotheosis of all the years, sometimes decades, of study and work that that composer has done to get to the point where he was able to make the song you're hearing. Or she. That is what you're hearing. You're hearing 10, 20 or more years of experience and extreme work to make that happen. And you're only hearing that from the best of the best. And by the way, everybody can do this with enough effort and dedication. If you're interested in becoming a video game composer and want to hone your skills, my friend Austin Wintory, composer for Journey, Abzu, The Pathless, and now Aliens Far Team Elite, is about to do a masterclass later this September. I will leave a link to that in the description because that will be a very valuable use of your time if you want to learn how to do this. What piece inspired you to start making remixes? I love this question. When I started making music, I remember one of my biggest desires was, hey, I would love to remodernize some of my favorite video game soundtracks from when I was younger and do them in a very good way. One of those pieces was the landing from Final Fantasy VIII, which is epic. I actually waited quite a few years before even trying to make a cover of it because I wanted to respect the original so much and I wanted to do it amazingly. So after I worked with Hollywood trailer music for a few years, I was like, now I'm probably ready to try it. And I spent 200 hours to make this remix, which is still one of my favorite things to this day. Some of you may know there's plenty of tracks I'd like to remix, plenty of short remix ideas I showed on this channel which I would love to complete, but alas, time for YouTubers is very limited, and for musicians even more so. If you're a musician and YouTuber at the same time, it doesn't make sense anymore. So yeah, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to make videos. I'm also trying to practice my skills as a musician, as a composer. This is why I make all the bass videos, for example. When you see me slapping on bass or whatever, it's not me telling you, check how cool I am, but it's me telling you, hey, I've learned this bass riff 1 hour ago after practicing for a few days. That is the only reason why I make those bass videos. That's the reason why they're not super long, full remixes, because they're just about me learning complicated riffs to get better. Now I'm trying to learn how to play piano. I know that if I post piano videos, probably no one is gonna care because there's so many piano videos on the internet. But when I'm not publishing remixes, doesn't mean that I'm slacking off. I'm working on other stuff. And as a YouTuber and musician and stuff, it's not easy to be on track of everything. That's why the Persona 5 Jazz thing has still not been made. Actually almost made, but I feel like I want to remake it entirely because the level of quality it had when I started it is not the same that I have grown into now. So maybe one day you're gonna see it. You guys asked me so many freaking questions. I have like a list of 40 which I still haven't answered, so I might just follow up on another video with those. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.